why do you think that those are okay versus what the government is trying?
Because I have a shotgun and rifle that I use for, and 22 gauge that I use for ptarmigan, moose, and black bear. They're traditional guns that I've had, some from my father all my life, and I know many hunters that have the exact, it's like I said to you before.
Finally, we will soon implement a mandatory buyback program to get these weapons of war off of our streets for good. Building safer communities, taking action at the border, banning assault weapons, buying them back, addressing the root causes of gun crime are all of the things that we need to do as part of a comprehensive strategy to end gun violence and to make sure that our communities are safe.
You mentioned communities. In November, Minister Goodale said the government was setting aside, what, $327 million to help fund anti-gun and gang initiatives. I'd like, if I may, to ask you to react to Mayor John Tory's comments at the summit today about that. Listen to this.
When they flow through the provinces, somehow these very large sums of money that are allocated to address things like I've been talking about seem to disappear into the ether. And that what happens is that the people who are on the ground actually having to deliver on these social challenges that we face in order to prevent gang activity and keep young people away from gangs don't end up with it.
Is he right? Does he have a point? Is there a way to ensure that the money gets where it needs to be?
Yeah, of course there is. And it's one of the reasons we today had representatives from the federal government, but also from the provinces in the room, as well as mayors like John Tory, to make sure that we could all get on the same page and that we could have that.
2 years ago, our government introduced a national ban on AR-15 and assault-style rifles. And over the course of the coming weeks and months, we're going to put into place the steps that are necessary to begin the process of launching a mandatory buyback program, which will get those assault-style rifles out of our communities once and for all, because they have no place in those communities.
I think I will always be haunted by the realization that if we'd only been able to bring in this prohibition sooner, it might have made a difference. That's perhaps unlikely, but we'll never know.
So we're doing all of that. We are changing our gun laws to promote safer communities, and we're doing it on the basis of the input and the feedback that we're getting from communities. The Canadian Association of the Chiefs of Police have said that Bill C-21 is a step in the right direction.
The city councillor is calling for a national handgun ban. Could we just get your thoughts?
I can tell you that the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police have indicated that that won't make any difference.
Nearly 4 out of 5 Canadians support this law.
But to bring in the new measures that I have just spoken of, we really need to introduce new laws and to make new programs, put new programs in place. And so the Prime Minister has said, we will do that in the next mandate. We will go to the people and say, this is what we want to do, and this is the right thing to do. And I believe the people will say, yes, we support that, and then give us the opportunity to bring in new legislation to be effective in keeping guns out of our community. There's no place for crime guns in our community. And we have to do everything possible to make sure criminals do not get the guns. We also have to make sure
The scourge of gun violence is an issue that has, for far too long, plagued our communities right across this country.
And the violence that takes place between the gangs doesn't happen in every community. It happens in certain communities where there's also issues of poverty and unemployment and exclusion. And
2 years ago, our government introduced a national ban on AR-15 and assault-style rifles. And
First, as you heard, we're introducing a national freeze on handguns. This means that individuals will be prohibited from buying, selling, importing, or transferring handguns in Canada.
Call out unacceptable rhetoric and hateful language wherever I see it. And there are people who are deliberately trying to stir up hate and intolerance and misinformation. And we do need to call out those folks.
it's important to remember, Canada is one of the safest countries in the world, and our cities remain among the safest cities anywhere in the world. The federal government has made an enormous commitment of over $327 million to put into this, but we want to get a good return
And that's why today's announcement, which is the next phase of rolling out a $250 million fund called the Building Safer Communities Fund, is so important. So we need to work with community leaders. We need to work with great municipal leaders like Mayor John Tory. And I want to take a moment to thank you, John, for all of your collaboration in this space.
You know, in our neighborhoods, and you know, for a lot of the gangs and people that commit violence in our cities, handguns are the weapon of choice because they're concealable and they're deadly. And so we know there's three ways in which those guns come into our communities. They're smuggled across the border, they're stolen from legal gun owners, and in some cases they're purchased legally and then sold illegally by gun traffickers. If a gang If a gang is in a dispute with another gang over turf for whatever reason, then they may be inclined to go and get their hands on guns to advance their own criminal purposes.
Of the remaining 58 that were traced, 57 were traced to the United States, to U.S., primarily Arizona and Texas, and only one of these firearms was traced to Ontario. It was a stolen firearm from a break-and-enter back in 2021. So, in essence, the overwhelming, whatever that is, 98% of these firearms are traced from the U.S. So that speaks to the Chief's comment about our border integrity and the flow of illegal crime guns coming up from the United States.
They need to get caught. So I've got to make sure that the police have the tools they need to catch and deter these people and prosecute them. And then when they do prosecute them, that means new offenses and new penalties.
We need those resources immediately. We only have about 9 to 11 officers in the field. We have one boat. I now say this to the Premier, Premier Ford, and to Prime Minister Trudeau. Open up your considerations to flow the necessary, adequate financial resources to get this job done.
A sense of isolation within those communities, and we need to do a better job of investing in those communities and addressing unemployment and early dropout rates and all the social determinants of that violence as well. And so, because this is a large country with a lot of different communities and a lot of different issues, we have to address this in a very collaborative
and customizing it for each market.
I think that was a lot of what we've accomplished today. And it's not just a matter of stemming the tide of guns. You've got to reduce the demand for those guns. And what we talked a lot about today was strategies to reduce the level of violence that's taking place, not throughout our country, but in parts of our country where gangs are very active and where their violence is having such a devastating effect.
Will some of that $300 million be going to help the CBSA stop guns crossing the border?
Undoubtedly. And CBSA has a really important role and has, over the past decade, been very effective in helping stem the tide of illicit guns that come. We border the largest handgun arsenal in the world, yeah. Terry, and CBSA has really proven effective. And what we've seen, I will tell you, 10 years ago, 70% of all the crime guns that we seized in my city were sourced originally in the United States. And what we're seeing is that number that percentage of crime guns has dropped to around 30%. And so far more often now, our gangs are obtaining their guns domestically.
So that's an illusion that a lot of people have, that the guns are all coming from the States, but they're actually not.
Well, so in essence, the overwhelming, whatever that is, 98% of these firearms are traced from the U.S. So that speaks to the Chief's comment about our border integrity and the flow of illegal crime guns coming up from the United States.
Well, it's still a significant number, but proportionally far less than was the case.
We've spent, in my area of border security, almost $90 million in new border agents and the police to stop the flow of guns coming in from the United States. And by the way, I very much appreciate it. I am also responsible for border security. We saw, for over a decade, significant cuts in the staffing and the resources of our our Canada Border Security Agency and the RCMP that conducted organized crime investigations. They got shut down. The Integrated Proceeds of Crime Units, 12 of them across this country, were shut down in 2013. The officers that were dedicated to conducting, in partnership with me when I was the chief in Toronto, the investigations into international cross-border smuggling of firearms. And that's the result of very effective work by CBSA, by the RCMP and their national weapons enforcement support teams, and by things like in Ontario, the provincial weapons enforcement units, and municipally with our guns and gangs unit. They're all working very collaboratively together to stem that tide of guns across the border, but obviously it's not enough. And
by investing at our border.
I think what we need to be able to do is present evidence to Canadians of what will work. And, I sometimes think about, we could say they're banned, but my concern is criminals don't pay attention to such bans, and if they can't get them locally, they will smuggle them across the border. And so you have to do everything. Also, just a blanket ban, in the absence of anything else, is very expensive. It would cost billions of dollars. And I would like to invest those billions of dollars, instead of just buying a bunch of guns to be destroyed, I would like to invest in communities.
First of all, let me disagree with some of the things you said. I've not been tasked with seizing people's handguns. I was tasked with conducting an examination. Sarge, we're not afraid of examining the facts and listening to all points of view. The evidence and the experience.
You are when you host consultations that are by invite only.
And so we're doing
That's
that.
not exactly public, is it?
And Sarge, I would also tell you that I appreciate that the data is incomplete, but I can tell you about a complete sample of data, which is the data that was collected during my tenure as the chief of detectives and then the chief of police in Toronto. Because during that period of time, we traced the origins of all crime guns in that jurisdiction. And during my tenure, 30% of the guns that we seized that were crime guns used in criminal offense came from domestic sources. 70% were determined to have been smuggled across the border. Now, there is additional
Minister,
data.
I think you've proved my point.
In other jurisdictions.
I think you've proved my point. You're going after law-abiding gun owners, Minister. You're going after law-abiding gun owners. Go after criminals.
Merci.
I think I will always be haunted by the realization that if we'd only been able to bring in this prohibition sooner, it might have made a difference in Nova Scotia. That's perhaps unlikely, but we'll never know. And you may recall this. There was a terrible, tragic mass shooting at a little elementary school in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, and 22 little children were killed.
And I will also tell you that there are some weapons that were designed for soldiers to use in the military and to fight wars. They have no place in a civil society. And we know that those are the weapons that people who engage in mass killings, who go into the mosque or into a synagogue or go into an elementary school to kill children. The weapons they use are military assault-style weapons. I believe there's no place for those in society, and so I've also been studying how we can eliminate those from our society.
The new revelations about the Uvalde Police Department and what a top Texas safety official calls its, quote, abject failure to confront the gunman who killed 19 children and 2 teachers.
As new surveillance images emerge from inside Robb Elementary School during the deadly mass shooting, overnight, city council members denying the school's embattled police chief, Pete Arredondo, the chance to take a leave of absence from his duties.
I make a motion we do not grant the leave of absence for Councilman Arredondo.
This as the actions of officers that day get a searing indictment inside the Texas Senate.
There's compelling evidence that the law enforcement response to the attack at Robb Elementary was an abject failure.